All right, the production possibilities curve is an economic model. It is a way to understand, it's purposefully simplified. It's a simple model to help us begin to understand something as complex as a giant economic system. Before we leave Module 1, we're going to learn one more model, and that's called the circular flow model. Here's my poorly drawn version of it. You can draw one as we go yourself. It's a good way to learn about it, but you don't have to. So pay attention to my little cursor here. It's right here, and then in PDF it's like this little cross. So pay attention. Notice we've got 4 boxes here in a diamond pattern, and we're concerned about these ones on the sides. First of all, households and firms. Households could be mom, dad, 2 kids, mom, dad, granddad, Uncle Louie. It could be mom, dad, and 18 kids, like a friend of mine I grew up with, not kidding. It could be anything. You get the idea. It's not just literally a house and not just a family. It could be a household of 1. The U.S. has approximately 25% of their households are households of 1 person. That's probably the only time in human history that's happened. That's an indicator of wealth. It's more expensive to live as a household of 1. So they're households. And over here on the left, we have firms. Firms I like as a term because it's broad. You can think of it as businesses. But firms is a broader term. Think of Hunter Street Baptist Church or the Red Cross. They're not businesses. They're not for-profit businesses, but they do provide goods and services, consume productive resources to provide those services. So they have economic consequence. So that's why I like the broader use of firms. Okay, so here we have households, and households you see right here in this this flow. That's goods and services that households consume. Where do they get them? At the product market. The product market is can be a literal place like Walmart, where you buy products, consumer products, aka goods and services. Or it could be a virtual place like Amazon. Or it could be just a very idea. You call up Joe the plumber and say, hey, come roto-rooter my toilet. But you access the product market to get your goods and services. Where do they come from? Well, firms. Firms supply goods and services into the product market where households get them. They pay for them. So in addition to this flow of stuff, all the internal flows here, stuff, the external flows are money. Households pay for this stuff. I put a $sign here. This is a money flow. This is I colored it green. This is household spending. You get a cheeseburger, you pay for it, and that money flows back to the firms. That's why they're selling the goods and services. When money flows into firms, we call it revenue. It's just a specific finance and economics term. We don't say income because really money flowing into households is how we use income. So there we have this obvious interaction that you're very familiar with. Now, how do firms create goods and services? Where do they create them from? Well, from productive resources, land, labor, capital, and entrepreneurship. They're also called the factors of production. Where do they get them? Well, up here in the market at the top called the factor market or the resource market. And land, labor, capital, and entrepreneurship flow into firms from this market. And they buy these things to create their goods and services, and they pay for them. So we have a money flow going to the factor market. We call this money for these things different things depending on which factor we're talking about. If we're paying labor, we call that wages. If we're paying for land, we might call that rents. Or for the right to cut timber off of land, we might call that royalties. And profit, when we're paying the entrepreneur, that's profit. So we call these different things, but firms pay for this stuff. Now, who supplies the factors of production? Well, it's pretty obvious now. Households. Households supply the productive resources. which firms use to create the goods and services that they sell to households. That's not entirely intuitive. You may think, well, gosh, I mean, land, labor, capital, entrepreneurship, that comes from households? Yeah, it does. Labor is the easiest one to understand. Most, 89% in fact, of America make money by selling their labor in the labor market. By the way, the factory market is just like the product market. It is both, it's an idea, but it can be a literal place like a lumber yard, or a virtual place like Monster.com for jobs, or just an idea. But households sell their labor, for example, through the factory market to firms to get the money they use to buy goods and services. They also sell land. My father, many years ago when he was alive, had a small piece of land in rural Alabama. And every 15 years or so, he would allow a lumber company to come in and cut the timber, and he'd get a nice check. Well, that's a household getting paid for providing natural resources. Capital. J.K. Rowling is a household, very rich household. And when she supplies the copyright to Harry Potter for it to be made into a movie, she gets paid for that, and she's supplying intellectual capital. And entrepreneurs, all entrepreneurs are households. Bill Gates is a household, and money flows into his household. Here's the money flowing in exchange for the productive resources. It's called, it's profit, and it's called income. When money flows into households, we call it income. So you see now that, you see what this is called the circular flow model of the economy. Now, I've left out one important entity in the U.S. economy, the government, here in the center. And I've put stuff flows on top, money flows below. Let's consider, for example, the government provides goods and services for households. Right now, you're receiving education provided. Oh, I'm sorry, back up. I drew this as a little government building, like a Capitol building, but government in this instance on this model means not just the federal government, but all levels of government, federal, state, and local. So you're getting a service right now from state and local government, education, and where do governments get the resources to provide these? Well, from households. For example, I sell my labor right here on this flow, not up here, because I'm selling my labor to the government, and they use that to produce education. There are money exchanges for this. The government pays households for the resources. I get paid for this job. Income flows into my household. And in turn, I pay taxes in exchange for these goods and services. We get a lot of goods and services: roads, sanitation, national defense, police. I could go on and on. We get a lot of stuff, and we pay taxes for that. That costs money. Now, over here, the goods and services like police protection that government provides for households, it also provides for firms. They enjoy that as well. What stuff do firms give to government? Well, more goods and services. The government has to buy toilet paper for their offices, and guns and tanks for the military, and x-ray machines for airports, and all kind of stuff. So there's an exchange of goods and services between firms and the government. Firms pay for the goods and services. The government pays for the goods and services, and it pays the firms, and we call that revenue. If they buy a fighter jet from Boeing, they pay for it. They pay very handsomely for it. Firms likewise pay taxes. Sorry about that. That's my phone. I would re-record this, but I'm not going to. It's my good production values. And so firms pay taxes just like households pay taxes. So this is simplified. I've not mentioned foreign trade, but this is a useful model of the economy. And the big takeaway from this, I think, is this: that we talk about gross domestic product, which is the total amount of goods and services a country produces. And so that's a measure of production. But we also talk about it as income. It's also how much money the country makes, because it's the same thing. you see that it's a big circular flow. We're all just sort of gifting resources and goods and services and money back and forth. So that's an important insight that will make, I think, increasing sense soon.